I am Richard Monroe, 66 years old, once a university lecturer in behavioral economics with more than 30 years of teaching. I had written books and built a stable career with a reputation for integrity in the academic world. After my wife passed away, I lived alone in the old house up north in Oregon. The house Margaret and I spent our entire life building, brick by brick, tree by tree. Every corner held a memory. When my only daughter Anna married a young, ambitious man named Derek, a self-proclaimed startup expert and tech investor, I transferred the ownership of the house to her out of love. In return, I kept a private room to myself, not interfering in the life of the young couple. But slowly I was pushed aside. The room was reclaimed to be turned into a podcast studio. I was moved out to the side porch, which used to be a storage area, with the explanation that it was a temporary arrangement for an important guest. Over time, I realized I wasn't just being dismissed. I was being removed. Derek was planning to use the house as collateral to save his debt-ridden investment project. That night, a light drizzle covered the sky, the kind of northern Oregon rain that wouldn't soak your coat right away, but lingered like a quiet reminder that November had arrived. I was in the middle of brewing chamomile tea when Anna walked into the kitchen, cautiously, like she was choosing the right moment to say something uncomfortable. "Dad," she said, eyes fixed on the window instead of me. "Tonight, we need you to sleep out on the porch, just for one night." I paused and gently set down the kettle lid. "Why?" "Derek invited an investor from Seattle. They need a quiet space to prepare the pitch. You know how startup guys are, they talk all night." I nodded slowly. "What about the living room? We turned that into Derek's workspace last week already." She stepped closer and placed her hand on my shoulder, as if to soften the blow. "It's just for one night. There's already a fold-up bed out there." I brought out a blanket. "There's a mini heater too. A mini heater for a porch open on three sides, once used to store garbage bins and garden tools." I didn't say another word. I closed the kettle, poured the tea into a thermos, picked up my pillow and blanket, and stepped outside like an uninvited guest. The porch floor was damp with moisture. The soft yellow light from the window spilled onto the steps like a thin veil separating two worlds. Inside were the clinks of glasses, bursts of laughter, and soft jittees. Outside it was me, the man who once owned every brick of that house. I lay down on the fold-up bed by the wall. The thin mattress did nothing to shield me from the metal bars digging into my back. A faint blend of mildew, old paint, and rotting wood lingered in the air. My head was just 1 meter from the glass wall. I could see Derek pouring red wine for a younger man in a gray suit, likely the one with the money. I never hated Derek. When he first came around, I was impressed. A young man who spoke fluently, confidently, always making the person across from him feel important. He called me Uncle Rich, shook hands firmly, constantly spoke about respect like it was a personal slogan. I never liked flashy startup types, but Derek was clever. He knew how to talk to someone who had taught behavioral economics his whole life. That's why, when he leaned through the window and saw me pulling the thin blanket up to my chin, he said jokingly, "Uncle Rich, the porch suits you. Older folks need more fresh air than we do." I gave a faint smile and didn't respond. Fresh air. Right. November air that seeps into every old joint. I had lived in that house for over 3 decades. Margaret and I bought it when Anna was still in diapers. We painted the walls ourselves, built the bookshelves, planted plum trees in the front yard. Margaret passed away 6 years ago from a sudden stroke. I had lived alone ever since. Then one day Anna called and said, "Dad, it must be lonely living by yourself all the time. Why don't you move in with us? That house is just sitting there, wasted." I agreed. After a few months of transition, I officially signed the papers to give Anna full ownership of the house. I believed in family. I believed in my daughter. At the time, I thought the worst that could happen was feeling lonely without the memories of Margaret around me. I was wrong, not because I was moved to the porch, but because I started to understand this wasn't just one night. The night before, I accidentally saw Derek printing a design draft of a remodeled house. In it, the room I stayed in was replaced with a podcast studio and a workspace extending to the backyard. I also overheard Derek on the phone outside mentioning the phrase primary collateral is the Monroe Place address. That was my house. I'm not a lawyer, but I know the language of finance. I've taught it all my life. And when someone starts calling your property collateral during a funding call, you should pay attention. I turned toward the wall and closed my eyes, trying to block out the laughter from inside. On the other side of the glass, Derek was telling a joke. The group burst into laughter. Anna sat beside him, laughing along, never once looking my way. A cold draft slipped through the porch slats. The thin blanket pulled tighter with each shiver. I knew that feeling. It wasn't just being insulted, it was instinct. The kind that tells you you've just crossed the line between family and outsider, and no one bothered to tell you. And I understood. From tonight on, it wasn't just that I was sleeping on the porch. I had already left that house. Quietly, but permanently. I once had a life people would call stable, even, if I may be blunt, something to be proud of. I taught behavioral economics at a small university in the state of Oregon for 34 years. It wasn't an Ivy League lecture hall, nor a factory for Fortune 500 CEOs. But it was a place where I believed in independent thinking, in understanding people through the seemingly irrational choices they made. Choices about money, family, fear, and trust. I was never rich, but I was never lacking. I invested in my retirement fund at the right time, avoided bubbles, stayed away from high-season real estate, and never believed in trending investment tips from YouTube. The very things I taught my students: financial discipline, understanding human behavior, thinking long-term, gave Margaret and me a life that was just enough. We bought the house when Anna was 6 months old, paid it off over 15 years, and fixed every corner with our own hands. Margaret chose the wallpaper for the kitchen. I built the maple bookshelf. We installed a small generator in the basement because she was always afraid of winter blackouts. The hallway wall still had pencil marks tracking Anna's height each year, from her first wobbly steps to her high school graduation. Margaret passed away one afternoon after teaching her usual yoga class. A stroke, no warning signs, a clean, sharp cut, like someone turned off the lights in spring. From then on, I lived alone. Anna grew up fast, too fast. She was smart, won a full scholarship, graduated in communications, and landed a job at a marketing firm in Seattle. I didn't interfere. My daughter had every right to pursue her own life. But the one thing I couldn't teach her, the thing I believed Margaret would have done better, was how to tell the difference between confidence and the kind of deception that wears confidence like a suit. Derek entered Anna's life when she was 28. I met him for the first time at a brunch Anna arranged. He wore a rolled-up white shirt, a smart watch, ordered black coffee with no sugar, and spoke like he had just left a pitch meeting with Elon Musk. "I'm building a startup that connects AI with user psychology," Derek said, looking at me like he was trying to impress. "The idea is to create a system that predicts customer emotion before they even realize what they want." I smiled faintly. "A reverse behavioral economics model." "Interesting. I've read your book," Derek replied without blinking. "The one about financial psychology and short-term decision-making." "Very practical, though I think it lacks the spirit of our era. Thanks for the feedback." That was the first time I tasted the false aftertaste in a compliment. But Anna looked at him like he was a dream she could touch. And I didn't stop it. Derek started showing up more often, once he helped me fix a printer. Another time he brought over a bottle of Italian wine from an investor summit. He wasn't unpleasant, just a bit too smooth, too polished, too quick with every response. The kind of person who always knew the right thing to say to win favor, and never said anything too real. I didn't object when Anna said they were getting married. She loved Derek, trusted him, believed this was the next step in life. I had no right to stop an adult from choosing a partner. The wedding was held at a lakeside resort. Derek said he got a good deal because he had connections with management. I sat in the third row, watching my daughter in the white dress Margaret had once wanted to sew by hand if she were still alive. Anna looked beautiful and happy. That was enough. About a year later, Anna asked me to move in, saying that the house being left empty was a waste. I initially declined, but she said she missed having an elder at the dinner table, wanted her future children to be close to their grandfather, said the house held her childhood. She wanted to return with her husband. I softened. It was the first time in years I saw my daughter wanting to return, to live in the home Margaret and I had poured our hearts into. I proposed keeping the house under my name, just in case. Anna didn't object, but Derek offered a professional suggestion that transferring ownership would be better for insurance, taxes, and joint financial planning. A property under your name might be considered passive and could hurt the family's overall credit score, he explained, like giving a lecture. I nodded, signed the transfer papers to give the house to my daughter, under the condition that I could stay in my own room and not interfere in their married life. Every term was recorded. I had the caution of a man who once taught contracts and risk. But there was one thing I forgot. The human heart has no binding clause. At first, living together was peaceful. Anna took care of me. Derek still greeted me every morning, sometimes brought pastries from my favorite bakery. But gradually, I began to notice small shifts. It started with the interior. The oak dining set was removed, replaced with minimalist furniture. My bookshelf was moved to the basement to save space. Then came my private room, converted into a temporary studio for Derek's podcast on ethical business in the age of AI. And now, the porch. In less than a year, I went from being the owner of the house to the man sleeping under a wooden overhang. And when I curled up under a thin blanket at night, I found myself wondering, would Margaret still recognize her home if she looked at it from where I now lay? One morning, while I was watering the lavender pots out on the porch, Derek came out holding a protein shake and wearing that smile, the kind that said, I'm about to say something super clever. Uncle Rich, he said casually, I've been thinking we're sitting on a dead asset we're not even using. I put the watering can down. What asset? This house, he said. He sat on the porch, railing like we were having coffee at a sidewalk cafe. I mean, the market is up nearly 17% year over year. It's an old house in a good location. Never been leveraged. I'm just talking about potential. I stayed silent. The way he said we always made my skin crawl. If we use this house as collateral, Derek continued, I could raise more capital for the new project. It's an AI app that tracks user behavior to predict financial decisions. Initial investment is around $200,000. In 6 months, it'll double. I looked him straight in the eyes, and if it doesn't, Derek shrugged, smiling like failure wasn't in his vocabulary. The world belongs to those who take risks, Uncle. I answered with just one sentence, slow and clear. This house is not a speculative tool. He chuckled, nodding. I understand. Just a suggestion. But I knew that look. That wouldn't be the last time I'd hear the phrase optimize dead assets. From that day on, things began to shift. No yelling, no arguments, just quietly, like water slipping out from the bottom of a glass. First came my room. I refused to give it up. Derek said he needed a real workspace. I was out one morning. When I returned, my bookshelf had been removed, my desk shoved into storage, and my bed replaced with a foldable multifunctional sofa. I asked Anna. She said, Dad, you can sleep in the utility room next to the kitchen. It's quieter. That utility room used to hold the washing machine and cleaning supplies. Then came the Wi-Fi. My laptop stopped connecting. I asked. Derek said, I reset the system to optimize bandwidth for video conferences. Optimize, that word again. The devices I used to read news and stay informed. Gone, cleaned out in the name of tidiness. Even my old radio that I listened to every morning disappeared. I asked Anna. She said, I think it's too old now. You don't really need it. Don't need it anymore. Every morning I walked around the neighborhood like a man with a schedule but nowhere to be. No one asked. No one called my name. Inside the house, it was keyboard clicks, Zoom calls, and laughter that didn't belong to my generation anymore. I started jotting down the changes, one by one, not because I intended to sue anyone, but because I needed something logical to hold on to. December 7th, lost personal Wi-Fi. December 12th, reading desk removed. December 15th, my daughter said I was too stubborn, that nowadays you need to be flexible. December 17th, Derek asked me directly, Uncle, do you think maybe you're holding back progress? I didn't answer, but that night, I sat out on the porch until late. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because I didn't want to go back inside. Anna no longer spoke to me the way she used to. She was busy, always busy. She said Derek's work was taking off, that in just 6 more months, everything would be fine. I asked, fine for whom? She went quiet, then said, Dad, you're a little old-fashioned. The world isn't like your time anymore. I understood. I had once believed that living with your children was a reward of old age, that you'd be listened to, asked for stories, included in dinners. But I hadn't prepared for becoming an obstacle in the eyes of the very person I had raised. Anna wasn't a bad person, but she had been convinced that moving forward meant leaving behind what was old. And unfortunately, I was part of the old. I used to tell my students that every financial decision reflects a person's true values. And now I was watching those values unfold clearly through the smallest actions. Tossing an old radio, cutting connections, redesigning spaces. That's how people discard what no longer yields returns. I, Richard Monroe, no longer yielded returns. I became a shadow, quietly moving through the house I had built, paid off and crafted brick by brick as a future for my child. And right then, in the middle of a winter night, I realized, if I was no longer the master of my own life, then it was time to reclaim that role, one way or another. That night, the rain fell in fine, needle-like drops that pierced the cold January air. I came home later than usual, having spent too much time at the Central Library reading financial reports and research papers on emerging investment trends in the startup world. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I needed to understand more of the language Derek used to make everything sound reasonable. When the bus stopped at the end of our street, I hunched my shoulders and stepped off, coat soaked through. But nothing felt colder than what I saw as I turned onto the stone path that led to the house. All of my belongings, suitcase, books, e-reader, old coat, house slippers, even my pillbox, were neatly packed in a blue plastic bin placed out on the porch. No note, no one waiting. The front door had been rekeyed. I knocked. No one answered. The lights were still on. Soft jazz played inside. I saw Anna walk past the living room window. When she saw me through the curtain, she turned away. I knocked again. My hands shook from the rain. Still no one opened the door. I turned, dragged the bin closer under the awning, wiped off the wet wooden bench with a cloth, and sat down. My soaked coat clung to my back like a second skin. I slept on the porch that night, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I needed time to admit one thing, that I had been pushed out of my own life. The next morning, I left before anyone inside woke up. I didn't want to hear recycled excuses like you misunderstood or it's only temporary. I walked to the cafe near the library, ordered a hot black coffee, and sat watching people pass by. Then, like a piece of memory clicking into place, I recognized a familiar face. Professor Monroe, a young man with light brown hair and glasses, approached my table. Ben Hastings, sir. I took your behavioral economics class back in 2012. Do you remember me? I looked up. His eyes were open and warm. His handshake was firm. I nodded and tried to smile. Of course I remember. You wrote that research paper on consumer behavior during the financial crisis, didn't you? Ben smiled. Yes, that's the one. I'm working in financial auditing now. Funny enough, I recently met Derek, your daughter's husband, at a startup event a few months ago. I looked up. What event? Ben paused, a bit hesitant. Do you know a company called Tetramind? Derek was listed as a former executive. Our firm reviewed their financials during a lawsuit related to misappropriated investment funds. The case was dropped due to ownership transfers, but Derek Williams's name showed up in the leadership documents. I didn't respond right away. That's not public knowledge yet, Ben continued. But I felt uneasy when I heard Derek was seeking new investors. It looks like the new venture also lacks a real product. Do you have any documents? Ben nodded. I have the capital call records from Tetramind's early funding rounds. And if you'd like, I can help trace the money flow. We met again the next evening at the library. Ben brought a hard drive and his personal laptop. On screen was a map of interconnected companies, all of them founded or managed by Derek. These are the 3 startups Derek announced in the last 2 years, Ben said, pointing. But strangely, none have a clear product. No open source code, no R&D reports, no MVP, no technical team. And where's the funding from? Here. Ben opened the second page, mostly drawn from mortgage-backed loans. One entry is marked as family partner. That one is your house. I took a deep breath. I suspect it's a fabricated startup ecosystem, Ben said quietly. Derek creates the illusion of running a network of ventures, attracting investors with flashy projections. But in reality, the money just cycles through paper entities. A refined Ponzi scheme. I exhaled. Exactly, Ben said. Only this time he's using your house as the anchor. I left the library that night with the hard drive in my pocket. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from betrayal that cut to the bone. Derek hadn't just taken my room. He hadn't just pushed me out onto the porch. He was using the house itself to build the illusion for a large-scale fraud. And worse, Anna believed in him. I used to think betrayal happened between strangers, but sometimes it begins at the dinner table, in handshakes that feel warm, in words that sound like concern. That is the most organized and the most painful kind of betrayal. I went to Mr. Stone's office on Monday morning, carrying the hard drive Ben had given me, along with a thick folder of printed documents I had marked up by hand through the night. Peter Stone used to be one of my students. Later, he became a lawyer specializing in estate and civil contracts. We kept in touch like old men who didn't have many friends. Occasional lunches, book talk, small discussions about life after retirement. I never thought I'd have to call him with the urgency I did that morning. Peter stayed silent for nearly 5 minutes after I laid everything out. He didn't interrupt. He didn't frown. He just reread the pages I'd highlighted, cross-checking them on his laptop. Signing a property authorization without notarization, he said, in your case is invalid. I didn't sign anything, I replied. I didn't hand over any documents. Peter nodded, even better. But I need to verify the current ownership status with the county registrar. Derek may have filed for a replacement title using some method. I won't rule out forgery, I said slowly. Neither will I, Peter answered, his eyes lighting up behind his glasses. I'll file an official request with the county office today. In the meantime, keep everything quiet. Do not confront him directly under any circumstance. That afternoon, I sat with Ben at a cafe mezzanine overlooking the park. Ben had begun drafting what looked like a forensic file. Bank flows, wire timestamps, investment lines under the label family. He showed me a Dropbox folder shared anonymously where Derek kept the presentations he sent to investors. One of them was a proposal aimed at a Korean investment group, SKT Quantum Holdings. Ben scrolled to page 7 of the deck. Here, he said, section titled Assets Secured for Series A. It reads, Residential real estate under family trust. Total value $1.2 million. Ready for collateral-based funding. I stared at the screen. That was my house. The coordinates were exact. A scanned title deed appeared beneath it. My name, but with a faint watermark below reading temporarily authorized. My spine went cold. If he uses the house as collateral, investors only need verification of control to finalize the deal, Ben said. And if the startup fails, you lose the house. I nodded. This is no longer a family matter. That night, I walked around the neighborhood. I didn't return home. I needed to think. Derek was hosting a networking event at the house. I knew because I saw the invite posted on LinkedIn. It read, Exclusive Showcase for Investors, including delegation from SKT Quantum. So it was clear. He intended to turn my house into a stage. A scene dressed in professionalism, stability, legitimacy. And I, the rightful owner, would be pushed aside, reduced to a shadow outside the frame. I called Peter back. We need a line in the sand, I said. A stopgap before he submits loan papers using the house. What are you planning? I want to show up at the event, not as a protester, as the one holding the truth. Peter paused. We can prepare a certified copy of the original ownership document. And I'll go with you. Ben will be there too, I said. We won't stop him with an argument. We'll let the investors see the facts. Right there. Right when they're about to sign. We spent the next 3 days preparing like we were building a case for a small courtroom. Peter contacted the county office, confirmed that Derek had filed for a replacement deed, claiming the original was lost. The office had not processed it yet, but without timely action, they might. I filed an official objection, attaching proof that I still resided in the house, paid taxes, and held the original documents. Ben compiled Derek's financial history, printing every document from the shell startups and the revolving cash between his companies. He bound it all in a blue folder titled Ecosystem Without Substance, Financial Layering and Startup Misconduct. One morning I stood in front of the mirror, pressed white shirt, gray tie, the thick winter coat I'd had for years, not to return as a professor, but to return as myself, a man who knew he was being stripped of his place and knew how to reclaim it with truth. The networking event took place on Saturday afternoon. On the backyard lawn, Derek had set up a white tent, cocktail tables, soft jazz, warm lights. I arrived with Peter and Ben. No one expected us. Anna looked flustered when she saw me. Derek froze for a split second, then smiled, recovering his composure. "Uncle," he said with a laugh, "I thought you were out of town this weekend." "I thought I should be here," I answered, meeting his eyes. Peter stepped forward and held up the folder. "We have a certified copy of the original ownership. The only legal title holder of this house is Mr. Richard Monroe." Derek's face went pale. A Korean investor walked over, catching fragments of the exchange. Ben spoke up, calm but precise. "We also have a full financial breakdown of the ecosystem Mr. Derek Williams described in his proposal. It shows overlapping entities, conflict of interest, and a lack of audit transparency. No shouting, no drama, just a heavy silence, and eyes shifting toward Derek like he was no longer the center of the room. I'm not a man who fights loud battles. I don't make scenes, but I know data, I know evidence, and I know how to make silence speak loud enough that no one can look away. I sent the invitation by email, printed 3 hard copies, and placed them on the dining table, right on the spot where a month ago I was told to make room for investors from Seattle. The title of the letter was polite, A Dinner of Gratitude, Family and Partners. Looking back on the startup journey with Derek Williams, I signed in my name. No threats, no hints, just a simple evening of gratitude. The same way they used to host networking events on the patio, in my own house. Friday, 6:30 in the evening. The long table was cleared and reset. I didn't hire a chef. I cooked 2 simple dishes myself. Classic grilled beef and creamy pumpkin soup, the one Anna used to like when she was little. Ben helped me set up a small projector in the corner of the room. Peter placed a small USB drive inside the pocket of his shirt. The atmosphere felt like a parent-teacher conference, except no one here was a child anymore. Derek arrived first, blue shirt, unbuttoned blazer, a bottle of red wine in one hand, pulling out a chair with the other like he owned the place. "Thank you for hosting," he smiled. "I think it's great you finally understand what I'm doing." I just smiled. Anna came next. Her eyes were cautious. I didn't blame her. That was the look of someone caught between 2 sides. I'd seen it before in my students when forced to choose between ideals and reality, between loyalty and what's right. Derek's 3 friends walked in last. I recognized them from Ben's research. Co-founders of the parent company and one listed as executive of Halo Chain Ventures. We sat down. I poured water, no wine, plated the food, made a few polite remarks. By dessert, I stood up and gently pulled down the screen, looking each one in the eye. "Before we end tonight," I said, "I'd like to share a few documents." As part of the transparency Derek once called the core philosophy of this ecosystem. Derek gave a tight laugh. "You're joking." I didn't respond. Peter nodded, plugged in the USB, and projected the first slide. Analysis of cash flow and legal structure of the Halochain ecosystem, from 2022 to 2025. Below that was Ben's logo, now a certified independent auditor. I didn't need to say much. I let the data speak. The next slide, a diagram of 9 subsidiaries and 3 parent companies, all showing one thing, circular capital flow, no real revenue. Then came an email, subject, getting Korean investor to sign before old man gets involved. Ben zoomed in on one line. Use house paper as placeholder. He won't know the difference. Derek froze. I heard the clinking of silverware stop. One investor pulled out his phone and checked the sender. It matched. Peter spoke calmly. "We've submitted this report to the county's private investment board and the Commerce Commission. But before any legal action, Mr. Monroe wanted a candid conversation." I stepped forward and placed a USB drive on each half-eaten plate. Inside is the full file, I said. No trap, no edits. You can verify yourselves. Derek stammered. This is misinformation, slander. I never... You can respond in writing, I interrupted, still softly. But this dinner is for me to speak. For the first time, maybe the last. I looked at Anna. She avoided my eyes, but her hand was trembling. I pulled out a piece of paper and read aloud. I used to teach ethics in finance. I taught my students. Assets are not physical things. They're the trust tied to them. If a man uses someone else's house deed to polish a startup pitch, the problem isn't in the technology, it's in the character. I turned to Derek. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed the trust my daughter placed in you, and you nearly mortgaged the house where Anna's mother died upstairs. Silence. No one moved. I gently pushed my chair back. Dinner's over, I said. I think the lesson today isn't for students. It's for those who think family is something you can exploit. 2 days later, Derek was removed as legal officer from both companies. One investor formally withdrew. A small article in the local Business Tribune mentioned a legal alert regarding misuse of personal property for funding guarantees. Anna didn't call, but she texted, Dad, I need time. But thank you, I was wrong. I read that message while standing in the kitchen, holding a cup of hot tea, staring at the backyard where Anna once learned to ride a bike, and where Derek once promised to build a tech garden. I smiled faintly. We don't need any tech garden. We just need a home, built on truth, and sometimes what a father needs to do isn't stay silent until he's erased. It's to show up at the right moment, with the facts in hand, and say it once, loud and clear. 3 weeks after that dinner, the name Derek Williams appeared on the local news, no longer as a promising young founder, but as the subject of a legal warning regarding private investor fraud. The County Securities Commission issued an emergency suspension of all fundraising activities by him and Halo Chain Ventures. The order was immediate, supported by a file submitted from the law office of Green and Stone, where I had sent the complete set of investigation documents. The capital withdrew like a fast tide. Investors needed no further explanation. They had seen enough that night. I didn't see Derek again after that, but Anna did come, not to cry or beg forgiveness. She simply stood on the front porch, the same porch where I had once been told to sleep outside. In her hand was a white envelope. I opened it. A set of papers, 3 pages thick. Divorce papers, signed Anna Monroe Williams. No tears, no long explanation. Just one line at the end of the letter. I thought I loved a successful man. I didn't know I was loving a liar. I looked at my daughter and nodded slowly. She left soon after. She didn't ask whether I forgave her, and maybe she wasn't hoping for that either. For the first time in years, I saw Anna's eyes not lost, not running. The next step was to reclaim the house, the same one Derek had skillfully written into the asset documents, turning it into a so-called family equity contribution. Mr. Stone worked fast. We presented proof that Derek had altered the contract post-signature. He had changed a small clause regarding transfer of ownership of contributed assets, enough to void the entire contract based on fraud. Within 2 weeks, the court ruled to return full ownership of the house to me, along with all the original title documents. Ben brought the court ruling to me and placed it on the dining table, the same spot where Derek once sat boasting about optimizing dead assets. I only smiled. Sometimes what they call dead is the only thing that survives. And then the case expanded. No longer just a civil violation. Investigators began reviewing the external investment rounds. A former employee filed a complaint, saying Derek pressured him to sign unclear documents. Then a female assistant stepped forward, not just about the finances, but about their personal relationship. Anna sent me a message. He was having an affair with his own executive assistant. She was living in an apartment paid for by Halo Chain, using someone else's investment money. I didn't reply, not out of coldness, but because I knew. Some wounds are better left to withdraw inward, like thorns pulling out from the flesh. Everyone has to learn how to heal themselves. The news began covering the upcoming hearings. Derek was indicted on charges of breach of trust, financial fraud, and forgery of legal documents in investment activities. I still live in the same old house, but I no longer sleep on the porch. I moved back into the second floor room, the one where my wife and I used to read before bed, where Anna was born, and where I once imagined passing down to the next generation. I cleaned the small library in the living room, dusted each shelf, and put back the teaching notebooks I had once written. Not to reopen a class, but to remind myself that real values cannot be erased by someone temporarily sitting in your seat. One afternoon, as I was making tea, a brown envelope arrived. No sender, but I recognized the handwriting. I can't reclaim everything I've lost, but I will start here. If you can still give me one more chance, please keep this letter. I folded it and placed it into an old wooden box, the same box where I once kept the best student essays and the faded family photos. I didn't call back. I didn't write back. But I left the back door unlocked. This house, after all, once was a home. Justice is not always a loud accusation. Sometimes it is a quiet reveal. And when consequences come, they don't need to be grand, only timely, only placed where they belong. And for the ones who need to face them, after all the noise and the collapse, the house returned to its quiet state, just like it was in the beginning. On autumn mornings, I usually get up a little earlier, brew a strong pot of coffee, and sit on the porch. The same porch where I was once forced to sleep. Now I've added a wooden chair, a few pots of lavender, and a small notebook. Not to write down the past, but to plan for the days ahead. I started reopening small free sessions on family finance. Not downtown, just in my own living room. 3 or 4 people at a time. Mostly retirees, a few former farmers, and some who had been tricked into signing papers they didn't understand. I didn't teach them how to get rich. I only said, how to keep what you've spent your whole life earning. And they nodded slowly, as if something tight inside their chest had finally loosened. Ben still visits often. He's now a financial consultant, invited to speak at seminars. Every time he comes, he brings me an article, a spreadsheet, or a new fraud warning from the Securities Commission. Teacher, he says, what I learned from you wasn't just numbers. It was how to hold on to ethics inside each number. I never answer that with words. I just look at him and feel at peace. Some seeds you planted a long time ago. Only now they break through the soil. As for Anna, she's slowly come back. Not suddenly, not with tears. Just once a month she arrives, cleans up the back garden, plants some mint, puts old photo frames back on the wooden shelf. Sometimes she eats dinner with me, stays silent the whole meal, then gets up and washes dishes like she used to. I never ask about Derek, never bring up the past. I just tell her who came to class that day, who almost signed something they didn't understand, and how I helped them. Anna nods quietly, then says, I'll go back to study asset management. Maybe. It's time I understood what you've been living for. I don't need anything more than that. One afternoon, I put back the wooden sign on the front porch, the Monroe house, a place where true values are protected. An old lady on a bicycle passed by, stopped, read the sign, then looked back at me. Aren't you Mr. Monroe, the one from the newspaper? The story with your son-in-law? I smiled. That's an old story. Now I'm just the guy who keeps the house, brews coffee, and helps a few friends avoid signing the wrong thing. She laughed out loud, then waved goodbye like we'd known each other forever. That night I sat by the window, the warm light casting shadows over the old table. I pulled out Anna's letter, the one folded many times. Beside it was the investigation file I had once given to the investors. I don't keep them out of resentment. I keep them to remind myself. Justice is not revenge. Justice is when the truth is told, and everyone must bear the weight of their own decisions. And you know, I've never regretted giving this house to my daughter, because in the end, the real value doesn't lie in a piece of paper. It lies in who has the courage to keep it pointed in the right direction, even when standing alone. If you were me, what would you do when someone with your own blood pushed you onto the porch with a smile saying, it's just for fresh air? Would you stay silent or start picking up every little piece of evidence? Would you be patient enough to wait for the right moment? And in the end, would you be kind enough to unlock the door again? I am Richard Monroe. I was once forced out of the very house I built. And now I brew coffee each morning, reading letters from those who once listened to my story. Maybe when a father stays silent long enough, that silence becomes the most powerful voice of his life.